One child in college is enough. You will work to support your sister, my dad declared into the microphone. We were at my sister's celebration dinner, and 50 relatives were laughing at my quote-unquote rejection. They thought I was the failure of the family. I didn't cry or argue. I just stood at the top of the stairs with my packed suitcase and a calm smile. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the IP login logs from the university tech team, proving exactly who deleted my scholarship offer. Then I held up my reinstated admission letter. Before I reveal the look on their faces as I cut them off forever, hit like and subscribe if you believe in justice. Let me know your age and what city you are listening from in the comments below. Welcome back to the channel. The microphone whined as my father, David, tapped it with his salad fork. We were at an upscale Italian restaurant in Naperville, Illinois. The room smelled of roasted garlic and expensive wine. 50 people sat at long tables draped in white linen. Aunts, uncles, neighbors, and family friends. They were gathered to celebrate my younger sister Chloe getting accepted to a private arts college in Chicago. I stood near the back wall, holding a glass of ice water, listening to my father rewrite the narrative of my life. Sophia had a tough break with admissions this year, he told the room. He offered a practiced, sympathetic sigh. He placed a hand over his heart, playing the role of the burdened but noble patriarch. But family steps up. That is what we do. One child in college is enough right now. Sophia's going to work full-time this year to help support her sister. We are so proud of her sacrifice. The room offered a polite, murmuring applause. Heads turned in my direction. They looked at me with pity. Aunt Carol gave me a sad smile. Uncle Rick raised his glass. To them, the math made sense. I was the competent, practical older sister who had simply fallen short. I was the reliable workhorse, now rightfully relegated to funding the golden child's dream. I watched Chloe beam from her seat next to my mother, Helen. Chloe wore a silk dress paid for with my wages. I did not blush. I did not look away or shift my weight. Inside the right pocket of my wool coat, my fingers traced the edge of a folded, 12-page forensic IT report. Tucked right behind it was an official letter from the Dean of Admissions, explicitly contradicting every single word echoing through the restaurant speakers. My parents built an entire social event around a manufactured failure. They rented a room, bought the food, and invited an audience to watch them cement my new role as the family ATM. I let him finish his toast. I let him build the lie to its peak. In cybersecurity, you do not interrupt a network breach while you are still gathering data. You monitor. You track the behavior. You let the bad actors feel secure. My father raised his glass of champagne. The room cheered for Chloe. They cheered for my quiet surrender. I took a sip of my water. I was not going to yell. I was not going to storm out. I was going to let them finish their appetizers, and then I was going to dismantle their entire reality. But to understand how we got to a banquet hall in Naperville, you have to understand the mistake I made 4 months earlier. Let me take you back to 4 months earlier. It is April 12th. To understand the weight of that date, you have to understand the architecture of my household. In my family, resources were allocated based on perceived fragility. My younger sister Chloe was an artist. She required vocal coaches, travel funds for auditions, and specialized lighting for her self-tape studio in the spare bedroom. I was the practical child. I required nothing. My bedroom was essentially a server rack with a twin mattress pushed into the corner. While Chloe was downstairs doing vocal warm-ups, I was upstairs writing Python scripts and configuring local area networks for small businesses in our town to pay for my own certification exams. I did not ask my parents for money. I asked them for silence so I could study. On that Tuesday afternoon, the silence finally paid off. I was sitting at my desk monitoring a network diagnostic when the notification banner slid across the top right corner of my second monitor. The timestamp read exactly 4:15 p.m. The sender was the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign Office of Undergraduate Admissions. I opened the message. The text was formatted in crisp, formal blocks. I had been awarded the Chancellor Scholarship for the College of Engineering. I stopped breathing. I read the bullet points 3 times to ensure my brain was not hallucinating the data. full tuition coverage for 4 years, room and board in the university residence halls, a comprehensive meal plan, a secondary stipend for textbooks and laboratory fees. It was a blank check for my future. It meant zero debt. More importantly, it meant total, undeniable independence. I had spent 4 years building a bridge out of my childhood home, and this email was the final permit. I hit print. I listened to the rhythmic hum of the inkjet printer pushing the ink onto the paper. I gathered the 2 sheets, stapled them in the top left corner, and walked downstairs. The kitchen smelled of roasting chicken and rosemary. My mother, Helen, stood at the granite island. She was slicing tomatoes with methodical precision. I walked up to the counter and slid the stapled pages next to her cutting board. I watched her wipe her hands on a dish towel. I watched her pick up the paper. This is the moment a child expects the cinematic reaction. You expect the gasp, the dropped towel, the overwhelming embrace. I watched her eyes track back and forth across the paragraphs. I observed her micro-expressions, the slight tightening of her jaw, the way her shoulders stiffened rather than relaxed. She looked at the monetary value at the bottom of the page. Then she looked up at me. She smiled, but the muscles around her eyes remained entirely still. "That is nice, Sophia," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the musical cadence she used when Chloe mastered a new piano scale. "We are very proud of you." She hugged me. It was a structural embrace, brief and hollow. I stepped back, feeling a sudden chill that I could not logically explain. At the time, I assumed she was just tired from her day at the high school administration office. I did not realize that my success represented a threat to the ecosystem of the house. In her mind, my financial independence meant she could no longer leverage my future to balance the family budget. My father, David, arrived home an hour later. He took off his work boots in the mudroom and walked into the kitchen. My mother handed him the paper without a word. He read it while standing over the sink. He did not smile. He calculated. I watched his eyes dart from the tuition waiver to the housing stipend. He nodded slowly, handing the paper back to me. "Well, that takes a lot of pressure off the table," he muttered, pouring himself a glass of water. "Good job getting that sorted out." Sorted out. He spoke about my 4 years of relentless academic dedication as if I had simply renewed my car registration. Dinner that evening was remarkably quiet. Chloe talked about a callback she had for a theater program, and my parents engaged with her eagerly, asking questions about the director and the venue. My scholarship sat on the edge of the table, an ignored artifact. It was not until the dishes were cleared and loaded into the dishwasher that the trap was set. I was sitting at the kitchen island drinking tea when my mother walked back into the room carrying a thick manila folder. It was her tax file. She placed it on the counter with a heavy sigh, rubbing her temples. "Sophia, I am trying to finish the federal financial aid verification for the house," she said, sounding exhausted. "The systems are a nightmare this year. I need to link the tax documents to your university portal before the state deadline, or it could mess up the whole household profile." It sounded incredibly boring. It sounded bureaucratic. It was the exact kind of tedious administrative task my mother handled every April. She pulled out a pen and tapped it against the granite. "Can you just write down your student portal login so I can upload these PDFs and link the CSS profile?" she asked. "I want to get this done tonight so I do not have to think about it tomorrow." I am a cybersecurity major. I spend my days studying the architecture of digital defense. I know how data breaches happen. I know about social engineering. I know that firewalls and encryption protocols are virtually useless against the oldest vulnerability in the world, the human element, the insider threat. People do not hack systems. They hack people. They create a false sense of urgency. They leverage authority. They exploit trust. But I was standing in my own kitchen. I was looking at the woman who packed my lunches for 12 years. I did not view her as a hostile actor. I viewed her as my mother. I made the most catastrophic security error a person can make. I trusted an institution simply because I was born into it. I reached across the counter. I picked up a yellow sticky note. I uncapped my pen and wrote down my university identification number. Beneath it, I wrote the alphanumeric password I had generated just 3 weeks prior. I tore the yellow square from the pad. I handed it across the island. She took it, stuck it to the front of her manila folder, and thanked me. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, went to sleep, and thought nothing of it. I thought I was being a helpful daughter, facilitating a boring tax requirement. I did not realize I was handing over the keys to my own escape route. I did not realize I had just armed the person who was supposed to protect me. If you have ever handed over your passwords, your bank details, or your credit score to a family member because they looked you in the eye and used the word trust, drop a comment below. Let me know I am not the only one. Because that little yellow sticky note cost me almost everything, and it paved the way for what happened just 3 days later. 3 days later, the mail carrier dropped a thick, cream-colored envelope into our aluminum mailbox. I was sitting on the front porch steps, replacing a frayed Ethernet cable for our living room router, when Chloe bounded past me. She did not walk, she performed movement. She snatched the envelope, recognized the embossed silver crest of the Chicago Conservatory of Fine Arts, and let out a sound that shattered the quiet suburban afternoon. She sprinted inside. The front door slammed against the frame. I finished crimping a plastic connector onto the copper wires. By the time I walked into the kitchen, the reality of the envelope had already settled over my parents like a heavy, suffocating winter's snow. My father sat at the head of the oak dining table. He manages a regional logistics warehouse for a commercial freight company. His daily routine involves moving inventory from one loading dock to another efficiently. He understands numbers, load capacities, and profit margins. He wore his faded blue denim button-down shirt, staring blankly at the glossy acceptance brochure spread flat on the wood. My mother stood behind him. She is a high school vice principal. Her career revolves around student crises, budget deficits, and managing the expectations of angry parents. The cost of attendance was printed on the second page of the brochure in a tasteful, minimalist font. $68,000 a year. I stood in the hallway archway. Nobody noticed me. Chloe sat across from my father, her hands pressed over her face, her shoulders shaking rhythmically. The math was simple, and the math was brutal. A warehouse manager and a public school administrator do not have $68,000 of disposable income sitting in a checking account. They did not have a dedicated college fund. They had a mortgage, 2 aging sedans, and a leaky roof they had been patching with cheap tar for 3 consecutive summers. I cannot take out private loans for the whole thing, Chloe sobbed. Her voice caught in her throat, a perfect theatrical crack. The interest rates will ruin me before I even graduate. I have to go, Mom. It is my dream. You promised me I could go if I got in. My father rubbed his hands over his face, pressing his palms deep into his eyes. Honey, we are looking at almost $300,000 over 4 years. That is another house. We do not have the liquid assets. We can barely cover the enrollment deposit by Friday. My mother placed both hands on his shoulders. Her grip was tight, her knuckles turning pale white against his blue shirt. She looked down at the brochure, then over at Chloe. The dynamic of our household shifted immediately into its default state. My mother lowered her voice, shedding its administrative polish and taking on a protective, determined edge. We will find a way, she said. We always find a way. David, she earned this spot. We are not going to let a price tag steal her future. I leaned against the doorframe, holding my coiled wire. The division of labor in our family had always been clearly defined, though never spoken aloud. Chloe was the artist. She was considered delicate, sensitive, a finely tuned instrument requiring constant attention and expensive maintenance. Let me paint a clearer picture of this dynamic. When I was 16, I needed a new laptop for an advanced coding seminar. My old machine had a fried motherboard. I sat at this exact same dining table with a printed spreadsheet of refurbished models, none exceeding $300. My father told me times were tight, the warehouse was cutting overtime, and I would have to use the public library computers. 2 weeks later, Chloe decided she wanted to learn the harp. A rented instrument and a private instructor appeared in our living room within 48 hours. When I asked about the cost, my mother told me that art requires investment, while logic only requires a pencil. I fixed my old laptop by buying parts from an electronic scrapyard and soldering them myself in the garage. They did not praise my ingenuity. They simply noted that I had handled it, reinforcing their belief that I never needed their financial intervention. I was the workhorse. I was practical. I was the child who fixed the washing machine by watching a tutorial on my phone. In their eyes, my resilience was not a skill I had developed through necessity. It was an inherent trait that required zero investment. They believed I would survive anywhere. My mother looked up from the table. Her eyes caught mine in the hallway. I expected her to look away, maybe feeling a brief sting of embarrassment over the tension in the room. Instead, her gaze held. I watched her eyes drift from my face down to the tool belt clipped around my waist. In that single quiet moment, I saw the exact psychological pivot happen. She did not look at me and see a daughter who had just secured her own future through relentless academic discipline. She looked at me and saw an inequity. To my parents, the household was a closed economic system. I possessed an excess of stability. I had a full-ride scholarship. I had zero debt. I had a university housing stipend. Chloe, on the other hand, was facing a massive deficit. To them, my success was not a separate triumph. It was a surplus of resources sitting idle while their favorite child starved. I watched my mother set her jaw into a firm line. I watched my father look at the glossy brochure, then look at the stack of unpaid utility bills resting near the fruit bowl. I walked into the kitchen, set my tools on the granite counter, and poured a glass of tap water. Maybe she can defer for a year, I said evenly. Work, save up for the deposit, and establish residency in the city to bring down the costs. Or look into federal grant programs for the arts. 3 heads snapped toward me. The silence in the kitchen became incredibly dense. Chloe lowered her hands. Her eyes were red, but her voice was sharp. Defer. If I wait a year, I lose my momentum. You do not understand how competitive this is, Sophia. Not everything can be solved by getting a job at a data center. My father held up a hand, silencing her. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Not everyone has your disposition, Sophia. Chloe needs a specific environment to thrive. We are a family. We balance each other out. We share the load. Share the load. He used the terminology of his warehouse. He was talking about moving freight to keep the delivery truck from tipping over. I drank my water. I did not argue. Arguing with my family about resource allocation was like arguing with gravity. You do not win. You just get tired. I rinsed my glass, placed it in the sink, and walked upstairs to my room. I sat on my twin mattress and opened my laptop. I pulled up the financial aid guidelines for the state. I assumed they would spend the weekend co-signing high-interest student loans. I assumed they would take out a second mortgage, complain about the monthly payments for the next decade, and expect me to fix the leaky roof myself. I was prepared for the standard level of parental sacrifice they always reserved for my sister. I went to sleep that night believing the conflict would be contained to their credit scores. I believed my future was locked, secured behind a university firewall and a formal letter of intent. I vastly underestimated the calculating lengths a parent will go to when they decide to rebalance the scales. I underestimated how easily they could convince themselves that stealing from the strong to save the weak was an act of love. And I had no idea that my mother was already walking down the hallway, carrying her tablet, heading toward the router. Tuesday morning arrived with the sterile hum of the high school library fluorescent lights overhead. Second period study hall. I sat at a laminate corner desk, drafting a preliminary algorithm for my final computer science project. The campus was quiet, insulated by the heavy brick walls. My phone rested face down next to my notebook. It vibrated once against the wood. A short, sharp buzz. I turned the device over. The notification banner displayed the university crest. The sender read as the Office of the Registrar. Subject line read, "Status update regarding your enrollment." I swiped the screen. The email client loaded. The text was brief, formatted in standard administrative block lettering. Your declination of the Chancellor Scholarship has been processed. Your admission to the College of Engineering has been withdrawn per your request. If you believe this action was taken in error, please contact the Financial Aid Department. I read the 2 sentences. I read them again. My brain, trained to recognize patterns in logical sequences, hit a wall. Withdrawn, declination, request. These were active, deliberate nouns. They did not suggest a passive error. They implied a specific, verified user action. I opened a new browser tab. I navigated to the student portal login page. My fingers moved across the keyboard through sheer muscle memory. I entered my identification number. I entered my password. The dashboard loaded. Yesterday, this screen featured a vibrant green banner confirming my housing assignment. Today, a gray box sat in the center of the display. Status canceled. A cold sensation started at the base of my neck and radiated down my spine. The library air suddenly felt thin. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the tile floor, drawing an annoyed glance from the librarian at the front desk. I ignored her. I shoved my laptop into my canvas backpack, pulled the zipper closed, and walked out the double doors. I bypassed the main office. I walked straight out of the building and into the student parking lot. The April air was sharp. I climbed into my Civic and locked the doors. The silence of the car felt like a physical weight. I gripped the steering wheel. I told myself to analyze the data, but my brain short-circuited. For the first time in my life, the firewall broke. I dropped my forehead against the hard plastic of the steering wheel. I let out a sound that was not quite a sob, but a sharp, ragged gasp for air. My fingernails dug into the synthetic leather cover until my palms ached. I sat there for 3 full minutes, letting the devastation crush me. I let myself be an 18-year-old girl who had just lost everything. Then I lifted my head. I wiped my eyes. My vision blurred for a second, and when it cleared, the vulnerability was gone. I forced myself to breathe in a measured cadence. I put the car in drive and merged onto Washington Street. The drive home took exactly 14 minutes. I spent every second of that transit analyzing the architecture of the university enrollment software in my head. A database error might corrupt a file. A server migration might delay a notification. But a system does not generate a user-authorized declination without an encrypted digital handshake. Somebody or something had accessed my profile and checked a very specific box. I pulled into our driveway. My father had parked his truck near the edge of the lawn, indicating he was home for his lunch hour. I left my keys in the ignition. I ran up the concrete path, pushed the front door open, and walked directly into the kitchen. The room smelled of sautéed garlic and butter. My mother stood at the granite island. She wore a dark blue apron over her work clothes, holding a chef knife, methodically slicing yellow onions. The sheer domestic normalcy of the scene felt offensive. My entire trajectory had just collapsed, and she was preparing a mirepoix. "Mom, look at this." My voice cracked. I shoved the phone across the smooth granite. She stopped chopping. She wiped her hands on her apron, slowly, deliberately. She picked up the device. I watched her eyes scan the text. I braced myself for the reaction. I waited for the maternal panic, the protective surge I had witnessed countless times when Chloe faced even a minor inconvenience. I expected her to drop the phone. I expected outrage. She inhaled sharply. She brought her right hand up to cover her mouth. "Sophia, what happened? Was there a glitch?" Her tone was entirely wrong. The pitch was too steady. Her eyes remained perfectly calm above her hand. She performed shock, but she did not feel it. The door from the garage swung open. My father walked in, wiping grease from his hands with a blue shop towel. He smelled of motor oil and sawdust. He looked at my face, then at my mother. "What is going on?" he asked, tossing the towel onto the counter. "David, look at this email Sophia just received," my mother said, handing him the device. He squinted at the small screen. His eyes darted across the words. He did not stiffen. His jaw did not clench. He handed the phone back to me and exhaled a long, heavy breath. "These automated systems," he muttered, shaking his head. "They make mistakes all the time. The software is probably updating and sent out a mass error message." "It is not a mass error message," I said, my voice rising in volume. "It says per my request. It says my admission is withdrawn. I lost my spot in the program." He stepped forward. He placed a heavy hand on my left shoulder. The weight of his grip was meant to anchor me, but it felt like a restraint. Take a breath, Sophia. Do not panic over a computer glitch. We will call the admissions office tomorrow morning and get it sorted out. Do not worry about it right now. Tomorrow morning. I stared at him. If Chloe had received a notification stating her conservatory spot was revoked, my father would already be in the truck driving down Interstate 55 toward Chicago. My mother would be on the phone with the dean of the arts department, threatening legal action, demanding an immediate correction. They would treat the situation like a 5-alarm fire. For me, the response was a suggestion to wait 24 hours. I looked back at my mother. She had picked up the chef knife. She resumed slicing the onions. The rhythmic tapping of the blade against the wood was methodical, unbothered. The crisis had been presented, and the crisis had been dismissed. Maybe it is a sign, she said quietly. She did not look up from the cutting board. A sign, I echoed, the word tasting like ash. She swept the diced vegetables into a glass prep bowl. You know how expensive living on a campus can be, even with a tuition waiver. There are always hidden fees, textbooks, lab supplies, travel costs. Maybe a community college is better for now. You can take your general education requirements at the College of DuPage. My father nodded slowly. He leaned against the stainless steel refrigerator, crossing his arms. It makes financial sense, Sophia. You could work part-time, stay close to home. Build up a solid savings account before you transfer. Everything happens for a reason, my mother added. She finally turned her head to look at me. Her expression was perfectly composed. It was a mask of pragmatic acceptance. They did not offer to drive to Champaign. They did not tell me to fight the administration. They had already accepted my defeat, and they were seamlessly transitioning me into a new role. I stood in the center of the kitchen, holding my phone. The pieces of the previous week began to click together. The high price tag for Chloe, the whispered conversations, the yellow sticky note with my password, the strange, still relief settling over my parents' faces in this very moment. They were not reacting to a tragedy. They were reacting to a successful transaction. My future had not been lost to a glitch. It had been liquidated. This is the part of the story I am not proud of. Every cybersecurity protocol dictates that when a breach occurs, you escalate. You quarantine the system. You identify the vulnerability. You fight back. I did none of those things. I was 18 years old. I was entirely dependent on the ecosystem of my childhood home, and I was exhausted. I made my second critical error. I folded. The next morning, I drove to the high school parking lot early. I sat in my Civic, watching the sun rise over the bleachers, and called the university admissions office. I waited on hold for 22 minutes. Finally, a board clerk named Gary answered the phone. His voice carried the dull resignation of someone who spent his days explaining tuition policies to angry parents. I gave him my identification number. I explained the email. I used the word glitch 3 times. I heard him typing. Miss Marilyn, there is no system error, Gary said flatly. The portal logs show a manual declination of the scholarship offer on April 14th at 11:42 p.m. Central Time. The box was checked, the digital signature was provided, and the submit button was clicked. The action is irreversible. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, but I did not do it. Someone else must have accessed my account. Gary sighed, a heavy sound of bureaucratic indifference. Unless you have a police report stating your identity was stolen, we cannot act on that claim. You are responsible for the security of your own credentials. The funds have already been redistributed to the next applicant on the wait list. I am sorry, but there is nothing I can do. He hung up. The line went dead. The silence in my car was total. I had spent 4 years building an airtight application, maintaining a flawless grade point average, and sacrificing every weekend to build network infrastructure for small businesses. All of it was erased by a single click, and the institution that promised me a future simply shrugged. I walked into the house that afternoon carrying the weight of total defeat. My parents were sitting in the living room. They had not gone to work. They were waiting for me. They knew exactly how the call would go, and they were prepared to execute the next phase of their plan. They did not offer sympathy. They offered a structure designed to benefit them. My father turned off the television. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. What did they say, Sophia? I told them. I relayed the conversation with Gary. I told them the funds were gone. I waited for the anger. I waited for my parents to rally behind me, to demand answers, to drive to Champagne and pound on a desk. Instead, my mother stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a printed application form. It is terrible luck, Sophia, my father said, his voice entirely devoid of shock, but we have to deal with the reality of the situation. You cannot afford the out-of-pocket costs without that waiver. My mother placed the paper on the coffee table in front of me. It was an employment application for Apex Data Solutions, a local logistics firm that managed digital inventory records. I talked to a friend who works in human resources over at Apex, my mother said. Her tone was brisk, efficient. They are hiring full-time data entry clerks. The pay is $18 an hour. It is not glamorous, but it is steady. You can work there this year, build up some savings, reapply to the university for the next cycle. I stared at the application. The transition was so smooth it felt rehearsed. My failure had barely registered before they presented a solution that kept me firmly anchored in Naperville. And since you will be living here as an adult, working full-time, my father added casually, we think it is fair that you contribute to the household. $600 a month for rent and groceries. It will teach you financial responsibility while you save up for your new plan. The math was staggering. $18 an hour meant roughly $2,400 a month after taxes. $600 would go directly to them. The remaining funds would sit in my account, slowly accumulating to cover the basic tuition costs I had already earned for free. I was being charged to live in my childhood bedroom. I was being billed for my own catastrophe. But the psychological manipulation was flawless. They framed it as a lesson in maturity. They framed it as a necessary pivot. I was the practical child. Practical children do not throw tantrums when the plan fails. They adapt. They get to work. Okay, I said quietly. I will fill it out tonight. My mother smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, reaching her eyes. She patted my knee. You are so resilient, Sophia. We always know we can count on you to handle things. I accepted my role as the safety net. For 3 months, my life shrank to the size of a cubicle. I woke up at 6 in the morning. I drove to a concrete office park off Interstate 88. I spent 8 hours a day migrating spreadsheets, formatting data strings, and updating inventory manifests. It was mindless, repetitive labor that required zero analytical thought. I was a machine executing commands. On the 1st of June, I handed my father a check for $600. He took it, folded it, and placed it in his wallet without looking at me. On the 1st of July, I handed him another check. Later that afternoon, I was looking for a stamp in his home office desk. I opened the top drawer and found a stack of bank receipts. I did not mean to snoop, but my eyes caught the account numbers. The deposits from my rent checks were not going into the household checking account used for groceries or the mortgage. They were being transferred directly into a joint savings account. The name on the account was Chloe Marilyn. Next to the deposit slip was a printed confirmation page from the Chicago Conservatory of Fine Arts. It was a receipt for the first semester tuition deposit and the securing fee for an off-campus apartment. The amounts matched exactly. The $2,000 I had paid them over the summer was funneling directly into my sister's dream. I stood in the quiet office holding the receipt. I convinced myself I was doing the noble thing. I rationalized that I was being a supportive sister. I told myself that family takes care of family, a mantra my father repeated constantly. But the truth was far more destructive. I was not just adapting to a bad situation. I was actively funding the very people who had created it. I was absorbing the financial cost of my own stolen future, and my parents were cashing the check. I needed to understand exactly how the breach happened. I needed raw data, and I knew exactly where to find it. Late July arrived with the suffocating humidity typical of northern Illinois. Inside the concrete walls of Apex Data Solutions, the environment was highly controlled. The thermostat remained locked at 68 degrees. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed with a low, constant frequency. I sat in cubicle number 42, wearing a gray wool cardigan, executing my assigned tasks. My job was the digital equivalent of moving boxes in my father's warehouse. I took raw inventory data from local freight companies, formatted the text strings, and uploaded the files into a centralized cloud server. By 2 p.m. on a Thursday, I had finished my daily quota. My supervisor, a mid-level manager who spent his days drinking energy drinks and watching sports highlights, rarely checked on me as long as my output was steady. I had 3 hours left on my shift. I pushed myself back from the desk. My mesh chair squeaked against the plastic floor mat. I looked at the blank monitor screen. My mind drifted, as it often did during those idle hours, to the campus in Champaign. The fall semester was exactly 5 weeks away. I should have been buying extra-long twin bed sheets and organizing my course schedule. Instead, I was earning an hourly wage to subsidize my sister's private apartment in the city. The injustice of it sat heavy in my chest, a dull ache I had learned to ignore. But sitting in that quiet cubicle, the analytical side of my brain took over. I am trained to understand systems. When a server crashes, a network administrator does not just reboot the hardware and walk away. They check the error logs. They locate the exact point of failure. They find the vulnerability to ensure it never happens again. For 3 months, I had accepted my failure without ever looking at the diagnostic report. I had taken a board admissions clerk at his word. I decided I needed to see the ghost in the machine. Call it professional curiosity. I needed to understand exactly how the system broke. I opened a new browser tab. I navigated to the university registrar portal. I bypassed the standard prospective student menus and scrolled to the technical support directory at the bottom of the page. I clicked on the link for data privacy and records. Under state and federal privacy regulations, educational institutions are required to provide users with the historical record of their account activity upon formal request. It is not a feature they advertise, but it is a legal mandate. I filled out the digital request form. I typed in my full name, my assigned student identification number, and my social security details. I uploaded a scanned image of my driver license from my phone to verify my identity. In the request box, I asked for the raw login data and user action logs from January 1st to April 30th. I clicked Submit. The screen displayed a spinning blue circle. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. I listened to the rhythmic tapping of keyboards from the surrounding cubicles. I prepared myself for what I expected to find. I anticipated seeing a string of numbers routing through a proxy server in Eastern Europe. I expected a brute force script originating from a compromised botnet. I wanted to find a faceless, chaotic threat. Finding a random hacker would validate my parents' belief that the world is unpredictable and systems just fail. It would mean my loss was just terrible luck. A notification popped up in the corner of my screen. A secure zip folder appeared in my download tray. The automated system had compiled my request. I double-clicked the file and extracted the contents. It was a single spreadsheet containing thousands of rows of data. I expanded the columns to read the headers. Date, time, user action, internet protocol address, device type. I scrolled past January. I moved through February and March. The rows documented my routine interactions with the portal, checking my application status, uploading my final high school transcripts, verifying my housing preference. The network addresses for all those entries matched my high school library or my cellular data provider. Everything was standard. I reached the second week of April. My pulse slowed down. The ambient noise of the office seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of my own breathing. I located the date of the incident. Row 412. Date, April 14th. Time, 11:38 in the evening. User action, successful authentication. I slid my mouse to the right. I moved my eyes to the Internet Protocol address column. I braced myself for the foreign routing number. I did not see a proxy server. I did not see a mass string of digits. I saw a static, local address. I stared at the numbers. When you spend your teenage years configuring local area networks for small businesses, you memorize regional subnets. You learn how different internet service providers assign their addresses. The sequence on my screen belonged to a major broadband company. It was the exact provider that wired the residential subdivisions in Naperville. It was the provider my parents paid every month. The air conditioning clicked on above my head, blowing cold air down my neck. The numbers stopped looking like abstract data points. They took the shape of a weapon. I moved to the next line, row 413. Time, 11:40 in the evening. User action, navigate to financial aid dashboard. Row 414. Time, 11:42. User action, submit scholarship declination. Row 415. Time, 11:43. User action, log out. The timeline was surgical. It was precise. Malicious hackers do not operate this way. A threat actor targeting a university database does not quietly log into a single student account, decline a specific financial award, and log out a minute later without attempting to harvest bank routing numbers or alter personal details. A system glitch does not successfully authenticate a session and navigate through 3 separate menus. Only a human being does that. And the local network address meant that human being was sitting inside my house. I sat back in my chair. The physical reaction was strange. I did not feel angry right away. I felt a profound, heavy clarity. The fog of the last 3 months evaporated. The narrative my family had constructed was a lie. I thought about the yellow sticky note I handed to my mother across the kitchen island. I thought about her standing at the counter the next day, holding a chef knife, pretending to be shocked by the email. I thought about my father telling me to be responsible and charging me rent. The betrayal was not a loud argument or a sudden burst of violence. It was a silent transaction. It was executed while I was sleeping in the bedroom down the hall. They did not just steal my future. They manufactured a crisis, played the role of the sympathetic audience, and then monetized my fallout to pay for my sister. I highlighted the 4 rows of data. I copied the information and pasted it into a new document. I saved the file to an encrypted flash drive I kept on my keychain. I closed the browser and cleared the cache. I did not cry. Crying is a reaction to unexpected pain. I was no longer a victim experiencing pain. I was a network security student operating in an active threat environment. Knowing the attack originated from the house was a massive discovery, but it was only the first step. A local address only told me the location of the strike. To build an undeniable case, I could not just point to the house. I needed to identify the exact weapon used. I needed the hardware address of the specific device. And that meant I had to go home, sit down at the dinner table with the people who sabotaged me, and break into my own family network. I did not leave work early. I did not clock out, drive home in a blind rage, and kick the front door open. In movies, betrayal is always met with immediate, explosive confrontation. In reality, confronting a hostile actor without concrete leverage is a tactical failure. If I called my mother and screamed about the network address, she would deny it. She would blame a neighbor. She would blame a virus. She would weaponize her tears, and my father would demand I apologize for disrespecting her. I would lose the high ground before the battle even began. So I stayed at my desk. I formatted the remaining inventory manifests. I logged out of the Apex system at 5 o'clock. I walked to my car, merged onto the highway, and drove home with the deliberate calm of an auditor preparing to execute a warrant. I pulled into the driveway at 5:45. The house was quiet. My father was still at the logistics warehouse, reviewing the evening dispatch schedules. Chloe was at her final voice lesson across town. I walked through the kitchen, where a pot of marinara sauce was simmering on the stove. My mother was standing by the sink, rinsing lettuce for a salad. "How was work, Sophia?" she asked over her shoulder, her tone light and conversational. "It was fine," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "Just a lot of data processing. I am going upstairs to study for a bit before dinner." I did not wait for a response. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom and shut the door. I sat on my twin mattress and opened my laptop. I needed to translate the abstract internet protocol address from the university logs into physical hardware. I needed a fingerprint. Every device that connects to a network has a media access control address. It is a unique alphanumeric identifier assigned by the manufacturer. It acts like a digital license plate. If you control the router, you can see every license plate parked in your driveway. I opened a command terminal on my laptop. I typed in the gateway address for our home network. A login screen appeared. Most people never alter the factory settings on their home networking equipment. My father was no exception. I entered the default administrator credentials printed on the sticker underneath the plastic box sitting downstairs in the living room. The console loaded. I navigated to the connected devices registry. I pulled up the text document I had created at work, cross-referencing the university access logs with the current active connections. The internet service provider dynamic address matched perfectly. The threat actor was definitely operating inside this house. Now, I needed the specific hardware. I looked at the list of physical devices. I eliminated my laptop. I eliminated my phone. I eliminated the desktop computer my father used in his office. There were only 2 devices left: a tablet and a secondary mobile phone. I ran a quick diagnostic ping to verify the hardware manufacturers. The results populated the screen. The secondary phone belonged to Chloe. It had been inactive during the time of the breach. The final device was an Apple tablet, specifically an iPad Pro. I stared at the screen. The identification was undeniable. The license plate matched. I opened a new window and pulled the internal system logs directly from the router. I set the parameters for April 14th. I needed to see exactly how the device moved through the network that night. The lines of code cascaded down the screen, establishing a precise, unarguable timeline. At 11:30 in the evening, the tablet woke from sleep mode. At 11:35, the device established a secure connection to the university domain. At 11:35, the device established a secure connection to the university domain UIUCEDU. Because the site uses secure encryption, my home router could not see the specific clicks or pages loaded. It could only see the connection tunnel. But I did not need to see the clicks. I had the exact timestamps. The router log showed the tablet maintained an active, uninterrupted connection to the university domain from 11:35 until 11:43. The university portal logs showed the declination was submitted exactly at 11:42. The timeline was a perfect, undeniable match. It was not an accidental tap of a screen. The localized connection window bracketed the exact minute the system registered the manual withdrawal. The threat actor logged in, executed the cancellation, and disconnected a minute later to leave no trace. It was an assassination. I hit the print screen command. I captured every line of data. I downloaded the raw diagnostic logs from the router interface. I compressed the files into a secure folder, encrypted the contents, and uploaded the entire package to a private cloud storage drive. I created 2 physical backups on separate flash drives. I secured the evidence. I closed my laptop. I sat in the dim light of my bedroom, looking at the closed wooden door. I thought about the architecture of my family. I thought about the woman standing downstairs, stirring marinara sauce. This was the woman who had kissed my forehead every night when I was a child. This was the woman who taught me how to read. And this was the woman who had waited until I was asleep, picked up her tablet, and quietly deleted my future so she could reallocate the funds to my sister. The betrayal was total. It was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated economic decision. She had assessed the value of my independence and decided it was worth less than Chloe's tuition deposit. She had stolen from the strong to subsidize the weak, and she believed she was justified in doing so. A sharp knock broke the silence. The door cracked open. My mother peeked her head inside. "Dinner is ready, Sophia," she said, smiling warmly. "Dad is home, and Chloe has exciting news about her dorm assignment. Come down while it is hot." I looked at her face. I looked for a flicker of guilt, a shadow of remorse. There was nothing. She was completely insulated by her own rationalizations. "I will be right there," I said. She closed the door. I stood up. The silent audit was complete. I had the network logs, I had the hardware identification, I had the timeline. But digital evidence is abstract. To force a university administration to reverse a legal declination, I needed more than just technical data. I needed motive. I needed proof that this was not just a theoretical breach, but a deliberate act of fraud. I needed a confession. And I knew exactly how careless people get when they believe they have successfully gotten away with the crime. The next morning brought a false sense of domestic peace. It was Friday. My father left for the logistics warehouse at 6 in the morning, his heavy work boots thudding against the hardwood floor. Chloe was sleeping late, exhausted from a grueling week of vocal coaching and theater rehearsals. My mother sat at the kitchen island, drinking black coffee and reviewing a stack of standardized test schedules for her high school. I stood by the refrigerator, pouring myself a glass of orange juice before my shift at the data entry firm. The digital network logs sitting on my encrypted flash drive proved the location and the weapon used to destroy my scholarship. But hardware logs are sterile. They show the mechanics of a breach, not the human intent behind it. To build an undeniable case, I needed to understand their internal logic. I needed to see how they justified the theft. The opportunity presented itself at exactly 7:15. The heavy diesel engine of the neighborhood garbage truck rumbled down our street. My mother looked up from her paperwork. She realized she had forgotten to roll the recycling bin down the driveway. She stood up quickly, smoothed her skirt, and walked out the front door, leaving it slightly ajar. She left her iPad resting face up on the granite counter. The screen was awake. It displayed a local weather forecast. The automatic sleep timer on her device was set to 5 minutes. I had watched her use it enough times to know her habits. I also knew she never used a numeric passcode while connected to the home wireless network. She found the extra security step inconvenient. I set my glass down. I walked the 3 steps to the island. I tapped the home button. The weather app minimized, revealing a grid of colorful icons. I did not hesitate. I tapped the green messaging icon. The application opened to a list of recent conversations. My father was pinned to the top of the list. I tapped his name. The screen populated with a long thread of blue and gray text bubbles. Most of it was the mundane logistical traffic of a 30-year marriage. Reminders to buy milk. Updates on warehouse delivery delays. Complaints about property taxes. I placed my left index finger on the glass and began scrolling upward. The dates rolled backward. July. June. May. I swiped faster, watching the blue and gray blur together. I needed to reach the second week of April. My chest felt tight, but my hands remained perfectly steady. I reached April 15th, the morning after the scholarship was manually declined, the morning the automated cancellation email arrived in my inbox. The conversation began at 8:12 in the morning. My father had just arrived at his warehouse office. David wrote, "Are you sure about this, Helen? If she finds out it was us. It feels wrong taking it from her. She worked hard for that spot." The text hung there, a gray bubble containing the first admission of guilt. He knew it was a violation. He understood the risk. 3 minutes later, a blue bubble appeared. My mother replied. Helen wrote, "David, do you think this is easy for me? It breaks my heart to do this to Sophia, but Chloe will literally shatter if she loses Chicago. She cannot handle rejection. We both know that." David responded, "But canceling her scholarship, it is a federal crime, Helen." My mother typed a longer paragraph. Her response was a masterclass in psychological rationalization. She wrote, "We are not stealing, we are rebalancing things. Sophia is strong. She is practically bulletproof. She will figure out community college and she will succeed because that is just who she is. Chloe is a glass ornament. She needs the right environment or she will fail completely. We have to protect the child who needs it most. It is what good parents have to do. God will forgive us for making the hard choice." Rebalancing things. I stared at the glowing screen. The words did not make me angry. They made me feel profoundly cold. The phrase was a logistical term. My father managed freight weight on delivery trucks. My mother managed academic budgets. They had applied their professional logic to their own children. They did not view themselves as villains. They did not wake up and decide to ruin my life out of malice. Villains in movies operate from a place of calculated cruelty. In reality, the most dangerous people are the ones who believe they are performing an act of moral heroism. My parents suffered from a twisted Robin Hood complex. They believed they were stealing a resource from the wealthy to subsidize the poor. Only, the currency was not money. The currency was resilience. To them, my competence was not a virtue. It was a surplus. They assumed my capability made me immune to pain. Because I did not cry when my computer broke. Because I did not demand expensive tutors. Because I fixed my own problems. They decided my emotional threshold was infinite. Chloe was fragile, so she required protection. I was strong, so I became a resource to be harvested. They stole my future because they sincerely believed I could just build another one out of thin air. I heard the heavy plastic wheels of the recycling bin dragging across the concrete driveway outside. She was walking back toward the house. I pulled my cellular phone from my back pocket. I opened the camera application. I disabled the flash. I held my phone steady above the tablet screen. I pressed the shutter button. I took 3 photographs of the exchange, ensuring the dates, the timestamps, and the contact names were clearly visible and in sharp focus. The digital logs proved the iPad was the weapon. These photographs proved my parents were the operators. The loop was closed. I tapped the home button on the tablet, returning it to the weather forecast. I set the device down in the exact orientation I had found it. I put my phone back into my pocket. The front door pushed open. My mother walked in, slightly out of breath, carrying a stack of mail she had pulled from the box. She dropped the envelopes onto the counter, right next to the tablet. They really need to adjust the pickup schedule, she muttered, smoothing her hair. Are you heading to work soon? I picked up my glass of orange juice. Yes, I replied. I have a long day of processing ahead of me. She offered me a warm, maternal smile. You are such a hard worker, Sophia. We really appreciate how much you are helping out this year. I smiled back. It was a perfect mirror of her own empty expressions. You are welcome, Mom. I finished my drink, picked up my car keys, and walked out to my Civic. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. I pulled out my phone and reviewed the photographs. The text was crisp and legible. I uploaded the images to the same encrypted cloud drive, housing the network logs. A younger, more naive version of myself would have marched back into the kitchen, slammed the phone onto the granite counter, and demanded an explanation. I would have screamed. I would have cried. I would have forced them to look at the evidence of their own betrayal. But confrontation without leverage is just noise. If I confronted them in the kitchen, my mother would cry. She would talk about how difficult it is to be a parent. My father would get defensive. He would list every meal he ever bought me and every dollar he spent keeping a roof over my head. They would flip the narrative. They would accuse me of invading their privacy. They would frame me as an ungrateful daughter trying to destroy her sister's fragile dreams over a simple misunderstanding. They controlled the house. They controlled my living situation. In a domestic argument, the person who pays the mortgage always wins. Guilt is only an effective weapon against people who possess a conscience. My parents possessed a justification. I started the engine of my car. I put the transmission into drive. I did not need an apology. I needed a reversal. And the people sitting in Naperville did not have the authority to reverse a university declination. The only people who could give me my life back were the administrators sitting in Champaign. I had the network data. I had the motive. I had a documented confession. Now, I had to take this forensic packet and drop it on the desk of an institution that did not care about my family drama. I had to force a massive bureaucracy to admit a mistake. I pulled out of the driveway, knowing the real resistance was just beginning. I called in sick to Apex Data Solutions on Monday morning. I told my supervisor I had a migraine. I walked out to my Civic, started the engine, and drove south on Interstate 57. The drive took 2 hours. I watched the flat Illinois farmland stretch out toward the horizon, endless rows of green corn stalks moving in the summer wind. Every mile marker passing my window felt like a physical measurement of the distance between the life I was supposed to have and the trap my parents had built for me. I arrived in Champaign just before 10 in the morning. The university campus was expansive, defined by heavy brick buildings, sweeping green quads, and wide concrete walkways. Students were already filtering onto the grounds for the early summer sessions. They carried backpacks and iced coffees, moving with the careless energy of people who belonged there. I parked in a visitor garage, paid the hourly rate at a digital kiosk, and walked toward the main administration building. The financial aid office was located on the second floor. It was a sterile, institutional space. The waiting room smelled of industrial floor wax and old paper. Fluorescent lights buzzed near the ceiling. I sat in a plastic chair, holding a black binder against my lap. A girl sitting 2 rows away was quietly crying while her father argued with a clerk at the front desk about out-of-state tuition fees. I watched them. I did not feel sad. I did not feel anxious. I felt clinical. I was not there to beg for a favor. I was there to present an audit. After 40 minutes, a clerk called my name. I was led down a narrow hallway into a small office. The woman sitting behind the desk introduced herself as Dean Carter. She looked to be in her late 50s. She wore a gray cardigan over a tailored blouse, and her reading glasses hung from a silver chain around her neck. Her desk was covered in neat stacks of manila folders. She carried the distinct, heavy weariness of a public servant who spent 5 days a week delivering bad news to desperate families. She gestured to the empty chair opposite her desk. "What can we do for you today, Miss Marilyn?" she asked. Her tone was polite but practiced, anticipating another tearful request for emergency grants. I sat down. I did not cry. I placed the black binder on the center of her desk. I opened the cover. "I am here to report a fraudulent declination of the Chancellor's scholarship assigned to my student identification number," I said quietly. "My admission to the College of Engineering was withdrawn on April 14th without my consent. I am the victim of familial identity theft, and I have the forensic data to prove it." Dean Carter stopped reaching for her pen. She looked at me, her eyebrows raising slightly. She pulled her reading glasses up and placed them on her nose. She pulled the binder closer. For the next 10 minutes, the room was silent, except for the sound of thick paper turning. I watched her read the table of contents. I watched her trace a finger over the network logs I had extracted from the router. She examined the hardware identification numbers connecting the localized internet protocol address to my mother's tablet. Finally, she reached the photographs of the text messages. She read the exchange between my parents. She read the phrase, "rebalancing things." She closed the binder. She took off her glasses and let them drop against her chest. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. The administrative shield she wore had cracked, replaced by genuine, quiet shock. "Sophia," she started, her voice losing its practiced edge. "This is a profound violation. I have seen parents forge signatures on loan documents, but I have never seen a deliberate sabotage like this. I am deeply sorry your family did this to you." "I appreciate that," I replied. "Now, I need my scholarship reinstated and my enrollment restored for the fall semester." Dean Carter leaned back in her chair. The sympathy in her eyes remained, but the posture of the administrator returned. She folded her hands together on the desk. "I need you to understand how the state funding mechanism works," she explained softly. "The Chancellor Award is a line item in a fixed institutional budget. The university does not keep spare full-ride scholarships sitting in a vault. When your digital signature declined the offer in April, the system automatically triggered an offer to the next student on the alternate wait list. That alternate accepted the funds. The money is gone. It has been legally reallocated." I pointed to the black binder. "But the declination was fraudulent. It was executed through unauthorized access. You have the proof sitting right there." She tapped the cover of the binder. "I have proof that a device in your home accessed the portal. I have photographs of a conversation indicating your parents are responsible. But I have to ask you a critical question. Did your mother guess your password, or did you provide it to her?" The question hit me like a physical strike. I maintained eye contact, but the air in the room suddenly felt thin. I remembered the yellow sticky note. I remembered writing the alphanumeric sequence with a black ink pen. "She asks for it to link the federal tax documents for financial aid verification," I answered. I wrote it down for her. Dean Carter nodded slowly, a heavy, regrettable nod. That is the institutional flaw, Sophia. You willingly surrendered your login credentials. In the eyes of the university system, any action taken using a shared password is an authorized action unless legally contested. We cannot simply manifest $60,000 out of thin air and revoke another student's funding because your mother abused the trust you gave her. The resistance was real. The bureaucratic wall was solid concrete. I had assumed the truth would be enough. I had assumed the university would see the data, recognize the injustice, and hit a master reset button. I failed to account for the rigid mechanics of liability. So what happens now? I asked. My voice remained steady, refusing to shake. Do I just walk away and let them keep my future? No, she replied firmly. You force our hand. She pulled a blank notepad toward her and clicked her pen. The university cannot act as a judge in a domestic dispute, she explained, writing quickly. We cannot penalize your parents or reinstate state funds based on internal server logs and photographs. We need a legal mandate. We need a document that provides the university with liability cover to draw from our emergency discretionary endowment. She ripped the sheet of paper from the pad and slid it across the desk. 2 options were written in black ink. If you want this reversed, you must provide one of 2 things, she said, her eyes locking onto mine. Option 1 is a formal police report. You file felony charges against your mother for wire fraud and identity theft. The subsequent investigation mandates our compliance. Option 2 is a legally binding, notarized affidavit of fraud, signed by your parents admitting they unlawfully accessed your account and altered your financial status. I looked at the piece of paper. The system was not going to save me. The system was demanding that I save myself by burning down my own house. Otherwise, Dean Carter added quietly, this remains a tragic family dispute, not a university error. My hands are tied until the law gets involved. I picked up the piece of paper. I picked up my black binder. I stood up from the chair. I thanked her for her time and walked out of the office. I walked down the concrete stairs and pushed through the heavy glass doors into the midday heat. The sun was bright, reflecting off the paved walkways. I watched a group of students throwing a frisbee on the grass, laughing, entirely unburdened. They were insulated by families who protected their futures. I was standing on the outside, carrying a binder full of betrayal. I walked to the parking garage. I sat in the driver's seat of my Civic and looked at the 2 options written on the paper. Option 1 meant sending the police to Naperville. It meant handcuffs. It meant destroying my parents' public lives and sending my mother to a state penitentiary. I did not want them in prison. I just wanted my life back. That left option 2, a sworn admission of guilt. A younger version of myself would have thought this was impossible. Getting my parents to sign a document admitting they committed a felony seemed absurd. They were too proud. They were too insulated by their own justifications. But sitting in that hot car, staring at the concrete walls of the garage, the final piece of the architecture clicked into place. I did not need to ask them to sign it. I needed to force them. I needed to build a trap so tight, so publicly inescapable that signing the document became their only means of survival. The silent audit was over. It was time to build the case. I treated my family like a hostile network breach. In incident response training, the primary directive is containment. You isolate the compromised nodes, secure the perimeter, and meticulously document every unauthorized action before you confront the threat actor. If you tip your hand prematurely, the intruder deletes the logs and vanishes, leaving you with a compromised system and zero proof. I returned from Champaign and initiated a strict quarantine protocol within my own home. For 2 weeks, I lived a double life. I sat at the dinner table across from my mother, eating roast chicken and asking about her day at the high school administration office. I watched television on the living room sofa next to my father, listening to his complaints about warehouse inventory delays. I smiled when Chloe talked about the bedding she was ordering for her Chicago apartment. I performed the role of the defeated, compliant daughter. They saw a safety net. They did not realize they were sitting across from an auditor. Behind my closed bedroom door, I compiled a forensic packet. Digital data is abstract. and administrators like Dean Carter require tangible, chronological proof to override institutional policy. I needed to build a physical chain of custody. I started with the router logs. I printed the hardware identification matching my mother tablet, highlighting the Internet Protocol address and the timestamps in yellow ink. Next, I printed the university portal access records, placing them side by side to demonstrate the synchronized digital traffic. Then, I developed the photographs of the text messages from my phone, printing them on high-resolution glossy paper, so the admission of guilt was undeniable. But I knew a skeptical administration might still argue that I could have logged in using my mother tablet myself. I needed an airtight alibi. I needed a secondary login attempt. I reviewed the portal data again, scanning the days following the initial declination. I found exactly what I was looking for. On April 16th, 2 days after the scholarship was canceled, there was another successful authentication from the Naperville network address. The session lasted only 30 seconds. It was a verification check. The threat actor had logged back in to ensure the cancellation was permanent. The timestamp read 2:15 in the afternoon. On April 16th at 2:15 in the afternoon, I was sitting in cubicle 42 at Apex Data Solutions. Over the next 48 hours, I executed a silent, surgical operation. I walked into the Human Resources Department and secured a certified, stamped time card history, building an undeniable alibi that placed me 15 miles away during the secondary login attempt. I took a bus to an office supply store and bought 3 heavy black binders. I spent the evening printing, collating, and organizing 30 pages of crisp, chronological fraud. Hardware logs. Portal access records. The text message confession. Tab by tab, I built a physical chain of custody. I did not need an attorney. I opened my laptop and drafted the legal trap myself. I titled it Affidavit of Familial Identity Theft. It detailed their unauthorized network access and intentional declination of my scholarship. At the bottom, 2 blank lines waited for their signatures beneath a notary seal requirement. It was a masterpiece of extortion built on undeniable truth. If they signed it, they avoided a felony charge but permanently documented their guilt. I slipped the printed document into the front pocket of the master binder. The audit was complete. The afternoon sun felt warm against my face. The case was built. The audit was complete. I held a nuclear option in my right hand. If they signed the affidavit, I could return to Champaign and reclaim my status. If they refused, I would drive straight to the police station and hand over the binder. But I knew I could not simply place the document on the kitchen counter and ask for their signatures. If I gave them privacy, they would strategize. They would minimize the damage, attempt to manipulate my emotions, and try to negotiate a middle ground. I needed to eliminate their ability to bargain. I had to secure the terms of my return to the university first, and then I needed to present the affidavit to my parents in a setting where they could not escape the consequences of their actions. I walked to my car, knowing my next trip was back to the admissions office. I did not return to my data entry cubicle on Wednesday. I took another sick day. I drove south on Interstate 57 for the second time in 3 days. The air in the car felt different. I was no longer a panicked student asking for a favor. I was a professional bringing a settlement to the table. I had the unsigned affidavit in my passenger seat. It was a loaded weapon. I arrived at the administration building just after 9 in the morning. I bypassed the front desk where Dean Carter worked. I walked up the central staircase to the executive suite. I approached the reception desk. I requested an emergency meeting with the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs. The receptionist tried to hand me a scheduling form. She told me the wait list was 3 weeks long and instructed me to sit down. I did not sit down. I placed the lawyer-drafted letterhead on her polished oak desk. I told her I was initiating a formal fraud dispute regarding a state-funded scholarship, and I preferred to handle it internally before filing a formal police report. She looked at the letterhead. She picked up the phone. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a leather chair inside a corner office. The vice chancellor was a tall man with silver hair and a very quiet demeanor. He read the affidavit. He read the forensic packet. I did not cry. I did not plead for my future. I treated the interaction like a corporate merger. I laid out the timeline. I explained the digital architecture of the breach. I presented the notarized time card proving my physical location during the secondary access event. Then I delivered the ultimatum. I told him I would secure my parents' signatures on the affidavit by the end of the week. That document would provide the university with legal cover to reverse the declination without admitting internal system failure. If they refused to reinstate my admission, I would take the signed affidavit in the binder straight to the local news stations and the state police. I would make it a public spectacle about how the university punishes victims of identity theft while protecting the perpetrators. He listened. He did not interrupt. He closed the binder. He told me the legal department would need to review the parameters. He told me to go home and wait. The next 3 days were an exercise in psychological endurance. I went back to Apex Data Solutions. I sat in cubicle 42 and processed inventory manifests. I watched the clock on the wall. At home, I ate dinner with the people I was actively building a case against. My father talked about buying a new gas grill for the backyard. My mother packed Chloe a lunch for her theater workshop. They were relaxed. They were comfortable in the security they had purchased with my stolen funds. I mirrored their calm. I nodded at their stories. I washed the dishes. I lived in a state of suspended animation, waiting for an institution to decide my worth. I was auditing their smiles, knowing what I held in my briefcase upstairs. The phone rang on Friday afternoon at 2:15. I was sitting at my cubicle. The caller identification displayed the university area code. I stepped out the back door of the office building. I stood in the humid air near the shipping dock and answered the call. It was Dean Carter. Her voice lacked the bureaucratic wariness from our first meeting. It sounded tight. It sounded calculated. The legal department had reviewed the evidence. The committee had reached a consensus. They offered a compromise. It was not a reset button. In the real world, winning does not mean erasing the damage. Winning just means you survive the impact. Dean Carter laid out the terms. The university would reinstate my admission to the College of Engineering. They would restore the Chancellor tuition waiver based on the evidence of localized wire fraud. They acknowledged I did not authorize the declination. But the institutional machinery had limits. The housing stipend and the living allowance were permanently gone. Those specific funds had been contractually awarded to the waitlist candidate. Breaking that contract to fix my situation would open the university to a separate lawsuit. The money simply did not exist anymore. I stood on the concrete loading dock. The roar of a delivery truck engine echoed off the brick walls. I ran the math in my head. The tuition was covered. That was the bulk of the expense. But without the housing stipend, I had to pay for a dormitory room, a meal plan, and basic survival necessities. It meant a deficit of $15,000 for my freshman year alone. Dean Carter explained the secondary layer of the compromise. The Financial Aid Office was authorizing a $15,000 subsidized federal loan in my name. To help cover living expenses, they would also guarantee me a student employment position working 20 hours a week at the Campus Information Technology Help Desk. The wage would barely cover the cost of textbooks and laundry. That was the cost. Success was not free. My mother and father had fundamentally altered my trajectory. Even though I had fought back, the scar remained. I would graduate with debt. I would spend my nights resetting passwords for freshmen instead of studying or sleeping. I was absorbing a heavy penalty for a crime I did not commit. My pristine, zero-debt plan was dead. I could have argued. I could have demanded the full ride. But a good negotiator knows when the well is dry. Pushing harder would just break the fragile agreement the legal department had stitched together. They had given me a bridge. It was a toll bridge, but it led out of Naperville. I accept the terms, I said. She emailed me the revised enrollment contract while I was still standing outside. I opened the document on my phone. I read the clauses. I looked at the new, daunting numbers attached to my name. It was a heavier, harder path than the one I had originally earned. The compromise felt like carrying a backpack full of rocks. I used my finger to sign the digital screen. I hit submit. I walked back into the office building. The air conditioning chilled the sweat on my neck. I sat down at my desk. I felt a strange, solid weight settle into my chest. It was not the light, airy relief of a fairy tale ending. It was the heavy, grounded sensation of actual independence. The debt was mine. The 20-hour work weeks were mine. But the degree would be mine too. The firewall was rebuilt. Nobody could log in and take it away again. The institutional side of the conflict was secured. I had a place to land. Now, I needed to close the loop at home. The university required the signed affidavit by Monday morning to finalize the reinstatement. I had the paperwork. I had my exit strategy. I just needed the signatures. And I knew my parents would never sign a confession in the privacy of our kitchen, where they could yell and manipulate the narrative. I needed a venue where their pride would work against them. I needed an audience. And as luck would have it, they had already mailed out 50 invitations for the perfect occasion. I did not tell my parents the terms had changed. I returned home on Friday evening with the unsigned affidavit tucked securely inside the black binder. The house smelled of roasted garlic and fresh bread. The atmosphere was light. My mother was standing at the kitchen island, organizing a stack of thick ivory envelopes. They were invitations. My father sat at the dining table, a calculator and a checkbook in front of him. They were planning a party. Chloe walked into the room, her phone pressed to her ear, talking loudly to a friend about a new vocal coach in Chicago. The entire household was orbiting her imminent departure. It was a well-choreographed ballet of self-congratulation, funded entirely by my forced labor and stolen future. "Sophia, how was work?" my mother asked, looking up from the envelopes. Her tone was bright. "It was fine," I replied, placing my keys on the counter. I walked to the table. My father looked up from his ledger. He tapped his pen against the paper. "First of the month is tomorrow," he stated plainly. It was not a request. It was an invoice. I opened my bag. I pulled out my checkbook. I wrote out a check for $600. The amount felt different this time. It did not feel like extortion. It felt like a strategic investment. I was buying my ticket to the final act. I handed him the paper. He took it, folded it neatly, and placed it inside his wallet. "Thanks, Sophia," he said. He did not look at me. He looked at my mother. "I think we can upgrade the catering package for Chloe's send-off dinner. The private room at Bella Vita requires a minimum spend, but this covers the difference." Bella Vita, an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Naperville. A place with linen tablecloths and $70 steaks. They were taking my wages, money I earned sitting in a windowless cubicle formatting spreadsheets, and spending it on bruschetta and champagne to celebrate the sister whose tuition they had prioritized over my existence. "It is going to be a beautiful send-off," my mother gushed, addressing the room generally. 50 people RSVP'd already. Aunt Carol is flying in from Denver. Everyone wants to see Chloe before she heads off to the conservatory. It is a big milestone for the family. I smiled. The muscle memory of compliance took over. "It sounds wonderful," I said. I excused myself and walked upstairs. I closed the door to my bedroom. The lavender walls, a color my mother picked out when I was 12, felt suffocating. The space no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the people who had breached my trust. I looked at the twin mattress, the desk where I had spent hundreds of hours studying, the bookshelf lined with technical manuals. A controlled demolition requires preparation. You do not just detonate the charges. You clear the blast radius first. I waited until 11 at night. The house settled into silence. The low murmur of the television from my parents' bedroom eventually faded. I opened my closet. I pulled out 3 large canvas duffel bags. I did not pack everything. I packed only what I needed for survival and my profession. The technical manuals, my laptop, the encrypted flash drives, 3 pairs of jeans, a handful of shirts, my winter coat. I worked methodically, ensuring the zippers did not rattle. I moved with the quiet efficiency of someone erasing their own digital footprint. I carried the first bag down the stairs. The wooden steps creaked slightly under my weight, but I knew which floorboards to avoid. I slipped out the back door into the humid August night. I did not park my Civic in the driveway. I had parked it 2 streets over, near a community park, anticipating the need for a quiet exit. The walk took 4 minutes. I opened the trunk, placed the bag inside, and walked back. I repeated the process twice more. By 2 in the morning, my entire life was compressed into the trunk of a Honda Civic. I returned to my bedroom. The transformation was stark. The closet was empty. The bookshelf was bare. The desk held nothing but a small desk lamp. The room looked stripped, hollowed out, as if the occupant had simply vanished into thin air. I left the bedsheets unmade to maintain a thin veneer of normalcy. For the next 3 days, I lived as a ghost in my own house. I woke up at 6, put on my work clothes, and drove to Apex Data Solutions. I came home, ate dinner with my family, and listened to them discuss the seating arrangements for the Bella Vita dinner. They debated whether Aunt Carol should sit next to Uncle Rick, considering their recent argument over politics. They argued over the wine selection. Not once did they notice my empty closet. Not once did they walk into my room and realize my books were gone. They did not see me. They only saw the role they had assigned to me. I was the silent foundation holding up the stage they were building. They were so consumed by their own performance, by the illusion of their perfect family dynamic, that they failed to recognize the foundation had already been removed. On Thursday evening, the night before the dinner, my mother found me sitting in the kitchen. She held a black dress on a hanger. "Sophia, make sure you wear something nice tomorrow night," she instructed, inspecting the fabric of the dress. "We are taking a lot of family photos. I want everyone looking cohesive." Cohesive. The word felt heavy. She wanted a visual record of our unity. She wanted 50 relatives to look at the photographs and see a functional, supportive family. She wanted to document the lie. "I will wear the dark blue dress," I replied evenly. "The one I wore to graduation." "Perfect," she smiled. "It is going to be a long night, but it is important to show up for your sister." Family steps up. Family steps up. She used my father phrase. It was their mantra, their justification for every boundary they crossed. I looked at her face. The casual cruelty of her request was staggering. She wanted me to stand in an expensive restaurant, wearing a nice dress, and smile for a camera while they celebrated a future she had actively stolen from me. I nodded. "I will be there." She walked away, satisfied. She had the caterer booked. She had the guest list confirmed. She had the golden child ready for her debut. And she believed she had the workhorse safely harnessed, ready to pull the weight of their decisions. They wanted the illusion of total control. I gave it to them. I let them rent the room. I let them pay the deposit. I let them invite Aunt Carol and Uncle Rick and all the neighbors. I let them construct the most public, expensive stage possible. They believed the dinner at Bella Vita was a celebration of their success. They had no idea they had just funded their own public audit. The stage was set. The audience was arriving, and I held the script they never wanted to read. Which brings us back to the Italian restaurant. The private dining room at Bella Vita was bathed in the warm, golden light of low-hanging chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of roasted garlic, baked parmesan, and expensive red wine. 50 people were seated around a long U-shaped table draped in crisp, white linen. These were the aunts, the uncles, the neighbors, and the family friends who made up the social fabric of my parents' lives. My father, David, stood at the head of the table. He held a glass of champagne in his right hand and a microphone in his left. The restaurant had provided a small audio system for toasts. He wore a dark navy suit, looking every bit the proud patriarch. Sitting to his immediate right was Chloe. She was wearing a new emerald green silk dress. I recognized the brand from a boutique window downtown. I also recognized the price tag. That silk fabric cost exactly the amount of the first rent check I had handed my father. I was looking at 40 hours of my data entry labor draped over my sister's shoulders. My mother, Helen, sat to his left, her hands folded neatly on the table, offering a practiced, serene smile to the guests. I was not sitting at the table. I was standing near the heavy oak stairs at the back of the room, near the coat check. My winter coat was already buttoned. My canvas messenger bag hung heavy over my shoulder. Inside the bag were 3 identical black binders. My father tapped the microphone. A sharp whine echoed through the speakers, cutting through the low murmur of conversations. The clinking of silverware stopped. 50 faces turned toward the head of the table. "We want to thank everyone for coming out tonight," my father began, his voice amplified and smooth. He paced slightly, commanding the room. "We are here to celebrate Chloe. As you all know, she has been accepted to the Chicago Conservatory of Fine Arts. It is a massive achievement. We always knew she had a special gift, and now the world gets to see it." A wave of polite applause rolled through the room. Chloe beamed, leaning her head against my mother's shoulder. My father raised his empty hand, signaling for quiet. He let out a slow, measured sigh. He was shifting the tone, preparing to deliver the narrative of the noble sacrifice. "Now, getting a child into a program like this requires a village," he continued, his face adopting an expression of solemn gratitude. "And it requires families stepping up when things do not go according to plan. As many of you know, Sophia had a tough break with admissions this year. The systems can be unpredictable. She lost her spot." He paused, letting the tragedy hang in the air. He looked toward the back of the room, finding me standing by the stairs. The 50 guests turned their heads to follow his gaze. "But family steps up," he declared, his voice rising with manufactured pride. "That is what we do. One child in college is enough right now." Sophia did not complain. She got a full-time job. She's working hard. She is contributing to the household so we can make Chloe's dream a reality. She is stepping up to support her sister. We are so incredibly proud of her maturity. The room erupted in a warm, approving murmur. Aunt Carol, sitting near the middle of the table, caught my eye and nodded approvingly, her face full of pity and respect. Uncle Rick raised his wine glass in my direction, a silent toast to the reliable workhorse. They believed him. They believed they were looking at a young woman who had gracefully accepted defeat and embraced her duty. They had no idea they were applauding a hostage. I did not scream. I did not cry. Crying is an appeal for sympathy, and I did not want their sympathy. I wanted their attention. I adjusted the strap of my messenger bag on my shoulder. I stepped away from the stairs. I walked down the length of the room. The hardwood floor echoed slightly beneath my boots. The guests parted slightly as I moved behind their chairs. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my father. He watched me approach, a slightly confused smile remaining on his face. He assumed I was coming to the front to give Chloe a hug, to play my part in the theatrical display of family unity. I reached the head of the table. I stood directly opposite my parents and my sister. The microphone was still in my father's hand. The room was entirely quiet, waiting for the heartwarming moment. I swung the heavy canvas bag off my shoulder. I unzipped the main compartment. I reached inside and pulled out the first black binder. I placed it flat on the white tablecloth, right next to a silver platter of tomato and basil bruschetta. I pulled out the second binder and placed it next to the first. I pulled out the third binder and laid it down to complete the row. The heavy plastic covers made a dull, authoritative thud against the wood underneath the linen. My father lowered the microphone. His smile faltered. "Sophia, what is this?" he asked quietly, the microphone picking up the whisper. My mother leaned forward, her eyes darting from the binders to my face. The serene mask began to slip. I reached into the inside pocket of my coat. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the formal reinstatement letter from the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs, printed on official university letterhead with a raised gold seal. I placed it directly on top of the center binder. "I did not have a tough break, Dad," I said. My voice was not amplified by the speakers, but it did not need to be. The acoustics of the dining room carried every syllable perfectly through the absolute silence. I looked at Aunt Carol. I looked at Uncle Rick. I addressed the room. "My parents did not tell you the truth," I continued, my tone flat, steady, and loud. The system was not unpredictable. I earned a full-ride Chancellor Scholarship, 4 years of tuition completely paid for. I turned my eyes back to my father. He stood frozen, his knuckles turning white around the stem of his champagne glass. "You and Mom logged into my student portal on April 14th at 11:42 at night," I stated clearly. "You used her tablet device. You manually deleted my scholarship and withdrew my admission. You stole my funding so you could afford to send Chloe to Chicago." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. 50 people sat paralyzed. The clinking of glasses had entirely ceased. I tapped the cover of the center binder. "The proof is right here. The network hardware logs, the internet protocol addresses, and the text messages where you and Mom explicitly admitted to doing it because you needed to rebalance the family finances." Chloe stared at the binders, her mouth slightly open. She looked down at her green silk dress, the realization slowly washing over her that she was wearing the proceeds of a crime. My mother's face drained of all color, shifting from a flushed pink to a sickly pale white. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I looked at the three of them. I had spent 4 months absorbing the cost of their choices. I had worked the morning shifts, I had paid the rent, and I had quietly packed my life into the trunk of a car parked 2 streets away. The stage they had built to celebrate their success was now holding the evidence of their felony. I had delivered the audit. Now they had to face the audience. The room went dead silent. The acoustic shift was instantaneous. A moment prior, the space was filled with the low hum of 50 overlapping conversations, the clinking of silverware against porcelain, and the ambient music playing through the ceiling speakers. Now, the only sound was the mechanical whir of the air conditioning vent directly above the main table. A waiter, standing near the kitchen swinging doors, froze in place, holding a silver tray of water glasses, unsure if he should step backward or remain still. My mother was the first to move. Her hands, previously resting in a serene fold on the white linen, darted forward. She grabbed the edge of the center binder as if she intended to sweep it off the table, but her fingers stopped. She looked up at the faces of her sisters, her cousins, her neighbors. The audience she had cultivated to witness her success was now sitting in the front row of her audit. "Sophia, what are you doing?" she hissed. Her voice was a strained, desperate whisper. She forced the corners of her mouth upward, attempting to project a tight, dismissive smile to the room. "This is a misunderstanding. You are making a scene. We will discuss this at home." "I am showing them the math," I replied. My voice remained at a conversational volume, but in that vacuum, it carried to the back wall. "There is no misunderstanding. The data is sequential and verified." I reached over and flipped open the cover of the first binder. I turned the plastic divider to page 4. I looked down the table at my aunt. "Aunt Carol, you work in insurance," I said. "You understand liability and timestamps. Look at page 4. That is the hardware address for the wireless tablet my mother uses to read her emails at the kitchen island. It matches the exact internet protocol address that logged into the University State portal on April 14th. Aunt Carol did not reach for her wine glass. She stared at the open page, then shifted her gaze to my mother. The pity that had warmed her face just minutes prior evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating scrutiny. I turned the divider to page 7. I looked at my uncle. "Uncle Rick, you manage a regional sales team," I said. "You appreciate direct communication. Page 7 contains photographs of the text messages sent the morning after the breach. My father asked my mother if she was sure about taking the funds. My mother replied that they were simply rebalancing the household. She stated that I was resilient enough to handle the loss, while Chloe was too fragile to face a rejection. My mother recoiled as if she had been physically struck. She dropped her hands into her lap. "David, say something," she pleaded, looking at my father. "Fix this." But my father was staring at the paper resting on top of the center binder. The official university reinstatement letter. He recognized the vice-chancellor's signature at the bottom. He understood that I had bypassed their authority entirely and gone straight to the institution. The logistics manager realized the supply chain was permanently broken. Chloe sat motionless. She looked down at the emerald green silk pooling around her knees. The dress I paid for. The dinner I was currently funding with my data entry wages. Her entire reality. The belief that her talent had secured her a spot at a prestigious conservatory, cracked down the center. She was not a prodigy supported by a loving family. She was the beneficiary of wire fraud. "You stole it," Chloe whispered. She did not look at me. She looked directly at our father. "You told me the state lost her paperwork. You said she messed up the deadlines." Chloe, please, my father started, his voice thick and unsteady. We did what we had to do. The tuition deposit was due. He stopped. He realized he had just confessed into a live microphone. A low murmur began to ripple through the room. It was the sound of 50 people recalculating their relationships with the couple sitting at the head of the table. Uncle Rick stood up from his chair, tossing his cloth napkin onto his plate. He did not say a single word, but the action was a definitive verdict. My father panicked. The patriarch mask shattered, leaving a desperate man trying to regain control of a room that was slipping away. He dropped the microphone onto the table. It produced a harsh static pop. He stepped around the chair and grabbed my left arm. His grip was tight, his fingers digging into the wool of my coat. "Stop this right now," he ordered, his voice dropping an octave into a low, threatening register. "You are embarrassing your mother. You are ruining your sister night. We are going out to the car, and we are going home to sort this out in private." I looked down at his hand gripping my sleeve. I felt the old instinct to submit, the ingrained response to follow his commands to keep the peace. But the peace was a lie. I was no longer the safety net. I was the auditor. I pulled my arm backward. I twisted my wrist sharply, breaking his hold. I stepped out of his reach. "I am not going home," I said. My voice was steady. My tone offered zero room for negotiation. "My car is parked 2 streets over. The trunk is packed with everything I own. My closet is empty. I am leaving for Champagne tonight." He stared at me, his hand hovering in the empty space between us. "You cannot just leave," he stammered. "What about your job? What about the rent?" Even in the middle of a public exposure, his mind went straight to the lost revenue. He was mourning the $600 check sitting in his wallet. I reached into the front pocket of the center binder. I pulled out the final piece of paper, the affidavit drafted by the attorney at the legal aid clinic. I placed it on the table in front of him. I set a black ink pen next to it. "The university agreed to reinstate my admission," I explained, looking him in the eye. "But they required a legally binding admission of guilt to override the state funding deadline without initiating a criminal probe. That is an affidavit of familial identity theft. It outlines the timeline of the wire fraud." I pointed to the 2 blank lines at the bottom of the page. "You and Mom are going to sign that document right now," I instructed. "Aunt Carol is a licensed notary. She is going to witness the signatures. I will take the paper with me to Champagne tomorrow morning. If you refuse to sign it, I will take these 3 binders to the Naperville Police Department and file a felony report for unauthorized network access and identity theft before I leave town limits." The silence returned, heavier this time. I had presented a trap with no exit. If they signed, they documented their own guilt in front of their entire social circle. If they refused, they went to prison. They had no leverage. They had no power. They were cornered by the very competence they had tried to exploit. My father looked at the affidavit. He looked at the police report threat hovering in the air. He picked up the pen. His hand shook as he scrawled his name on the line. He slid the paper to my mother. She signed it without reading the paragraphs, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes, landing in dark spots on the crisp white paper. I picked up the document. I folded it and placed it inside my coat pocket. I left the 3 binders on the table. They belonged to the audience now. I looked at my parents for the last time. They looked small. The illusion of their authority was gone, replaced by the stark reality of their choices. "You told everyone I was the practical one," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "You justified stealing my future because you believed I was resilient enough to survive the damage. You wanted me to be the strong one. You got exactly what you asked for. Have a great dinner." I turned my back to the table. I walked toward the oak stairs. The sound of my boots hitting the wood steps was sharp, rhythmic, and decisive. I did not look over my shoulder. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the cool evening air. The street was quiet. I adjusted the strap of my messenger bag, took a deep breath of the night sky, and started walking toward my car. The stage was behind me. The road was ahead. I drove south on Interstate 57 with the windows rolled down. The humid night air rushed through the cabin of my Civic. The signed affidavit rested on the passenger seat, illuminated by the faint green glow of the dashboard interface. I did not turn on the radio. The hum of the tires against the asphalt was the only sound I needed. I submitted the document to the Vice Chancellor office the following Monday morning. The state funds were officially released. My enrollment was secured. I did not file a police report with the local authorities. I did not need the legal system to punish my parents. The social system in Naperville executed the sentence with far more efficiency. The fallout from the dinner at Bella Vita was immediate, silent, and permanent. In a suburban community built on reputation and perceived stability, the public exposure of wire fraud is a terminal event. Word travels quickly when 50 people witness a confession. Aunt Carol did not yell at my mother. She simply stopped calling. When the holidays arrived 3 months later, the annual invitation to her house in Denver never materialized. Uncle Rick quietly removed my father from his standing Saturday golf reservation. The neighborhood block parties occurred without them. My mother stepped down from her volunteer position on the school district fundraising committee. She claimed she needed more time for herself, but the reality was that the other administrators had heard the rumors, and the lingering stares in the hallway became too heavy to endure. They still live in the same house. My father still drives to the logistics warehouse. My mother still manages student files. But the house is quiet now. The audience they spent decades cultivating walked out during the second act and refused to buy another ticket. They are isolated on an island of their own creation, left to sit across from each other at the oak dining table, surrounded by the silence they purchased. Chloe stayed in Chicago. She moved into her off-campus apartment and began her classes at the conservatory. But the ecosystem that subsidized her existence collapsed the night I walked out of the restaurant. The $600 rent checks stopped appearing in the joint savings account. Without my wages to cover the gap, my parents could not shield her from the math. Chloe had to walk into a private bank, sit across from a loan officer, and sign a master promissory note. She secured a private student loan with an 11% interest rate on a 20-year repayment term. She posts on social media frequently. I do not follow her accounts, but the algorithms occasionally push her content onto my feed. She posts artistic photographs of her sheet music resting on coffee shop tables. Below the images, she writes long paragraphs complaining about the systemic unfairness of the higher education economy. She talks about the crushing burden of debt and how difficult it is for creatives to survive without support. I read her updates. I do not leave a comment. I do not point out that her burden was originally assigned to me. I just scroll past the post and close the application. My life in Champaign is not a glamorous cinematic montage. It is practical. It is exhausting. Success without a safety net requires an extraordinary amount of manual labor. I live in a modest dormitory on the edge of campus. My room is small, furnished with a standard-issue desk and a narrow bed. I do not have lavender walls. I do not have a family to call when the radiator stops working. I took out the $15,000 federal loan to cover my housing and meals. Every month, I look at the balance on my portal. It is a heavy number. To pay for my textbooks and basic necessities, I work the night shift at the University Library Information Technology Help Desk. I clock in at 10 in the evening and leave at 2 in the morning. I spend 4 hours a day resetting passwords for 18-year-olds who forgot their credentials. I troubleshoot network connectivity issues. I explain the basics of data encryption to students who leave their laptops unlocked in public spaces. The irony is not lost on me. I am paid an hourly wage to protect the digital perimeters of strangers, simply because the people who were supposed to protect mine decided to breach it. During the day, I study data analytics and network architecture. I maintain a flawless grade point average. I drink cheap coffee from a paper cup. I map out my weekly budget on a spreadsheet, tracking every dollar with the same clinical precision I use to audit my home router. The margin for error is 0. If my card transmission fails, I do not have an emergency fund to fix it. If I get sick, I have to work through the fever. The vulnerability of independence is a constant, low-level hum in the back of my mind. I am tired. There are mornings when my alarm goes off at 6 and the physical weight of exhaustion makes it difficult to stand up. The path I am walking is steep. It is far heavier than the flawless, debt-free trajectory I had originally earned. But it is mine. I own the debt. I own the exhaustion. I own the degree I am building. I sit at my desk in the early hours of the morning, watching the sun rise over the engineering quad, and I feel a profound, unshakable peace. The math is tight, but the math is honest. I lost the family that was supposed to act as my foundation. I lost the illusion that shared DNA guarantees loyalty, but in the process of losing them, I found the only person capable of guaranteeing my survival. I became the administrator of my own life. My digital footprint is locked behind two-factor authentication and randomized security keys. My physical boundaries are drawn in concrete. Nobody can log in and quietly delete my future ever again. The ledger is closed. The account is secure. If you are listening to this and you recognize the architecture of my story in your own life, if you are the reliable one, the practical one, the child who fixes the broken things, listen to me closely. Resilience is a tool for your own survival, not a resource for your family to harvest. If you are ever handed the bill for a crisis you did not create, do not argue. Do not scream. Just gather your data, pack your car, and walk away. Competence is not a currency you owe to the people who refuse to manage their own deficits. What is the one boundary you had to draw that finally changed your life for the better? Tell me in the comments below. Hit like, subscribe for more stories, and I will see you in the next one.